Hello everybody and welcome to the Antpod, where today we'll be talking about the impacts of VIVs. And what is a VIV? Well, it's a box often made of wood either with or without insulation inside. This box is then controlled heated to a set temperature and suddenly you have an affordable and effective way to keeping your ants hot. But what's the big deal with them? Well, on today's podcast, we'll discuss just that. Once again, we're joined by Lynn, Jake, and I am Alex. Jake, how are you doing, Jake?
Oh, good today, yeah. All well. Yes, pretty good actually, very well to be fair, because I checked on the messes and they're looking good.
Guys, we need to make sure Jake is happy because he's had some bad luck during this winter. So, how's the worker doing? Can you still tell her apart
William.
from the others? Yeah, William. Can you still tell him apart?
Which one's William? But he's got 5 sisters now.
And they're all still smaller.
Yeah, and
I love
little magical William he's just running things, I think.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. Be sure to check out Jake's channel Antimatters to understand what we're talking about. But yeah, Jake, to start off the conversation, what's your experiences with having VIVs?
Well, I've had quite a few to be fair, because I'm a bit of a cheapskate and I didn't want to have to pay a lot to heat things up. So yeah, I've had about 3 altogether. But my current one's quite big, and I just bodged it together myself, pretty much.
Yeah, I was about to say, because they've all mainly been DIY VIVs, right?
The first one was, yeah. Second one was actually a tool cabinet, like a little plastic tool cabinet, which I'd lined with a little bit of bubble wrap as well to kind of make it a bit better at holding on to the heat. But yeah, it was actually like a tool cabinet, and that worked really well. I did like that one. It just got a bit too small in the end.
Yeah, so have you had any issues with them, or have they just worked as you intended?
Pretty much, yeah. They've all seemed to have worked as intended. Apart from, the first one was a bit of a learning curve, because I was trying to heat up like a tub with a heat mat, and it was just not working. Which, it took me a while to figure that out, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. I think you should, that's the one where you had bicarbonates inside at one point, right?
Actually, it might be another one. Yeah. I might have had even more VIVs actually. Sometimes I put them in drawers as well. So I'll have a drawer that's also almost a VIV, to be fair. Yeah, I've done quite a few over the years.
Well, I mean, that's why we're doing this podcast today. I just want to say, which I'll also say later, a VIV is not a new idea or anything. This podcast is just meant to educate people who are not into these VIVs yet. But so Jake, how are you? Yeah, exactly. I was about to say it's also one of the common names, incubator.
Or incubator. You gotta say incubator.
Ah, so sorry. Incubator.
Yeah.
And I actually had a little discussion with Wakushi what defines a VIV, because a VIV is short for vivarium, and I thought my vivarium with dirt inside was called a vivarium, but vivarium is an artificial setup which have semi-naturalistic something. Either way, it's artificial and semi-natural, and my setup with dirt inside is actually a terrarium because it has dirt inside, and if it was more than 80% water, it would be a paludarium. Paludarium? Fancy words I can't speak. Either way, it's called a VIV.
We need Ryan for that one.
Yeah, exactly. Where's Ryan? But yeah, so a VIV is not an incorrect term at least. But just before we move on to the experiences of Lynn, Jake, how have you been heating these setups, and how have you controlled heating these setups?
Well, I just normally I'll get me heat wire. I'll get a 5 meter one usually, because they give off a good amount of heat, and you can keep a good sized chamber nice and warm with a 50 watt heat wire. I think they're normally about 5 meters or something. Yeah. And then I just hook it up to a little thermostat. I just get the little cheap ones off the internet. I think they're about a tenner. And yeah, plug that in, set it up to normally between about 25 to 25.5 or something like that, and kind of set it on its way.
All right.
And make sure the probe is in the right place though, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah. That's something we'll come back to later on, because the probe position, which is actually something I haven't written in the original script right here, but the probe position is that's definitely important. But yeah, we also have Lynn here today. Lynn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. I'm fine.
That's not bad at least. And so Lynn, what is your experience with the VIFs?
Well, just like you said, when everybody was talking about VIFs, I got kind of confused because to me, and probably for most people, a VIF is indeed a place with plants. So you have the VIF for the plants, terrariums, which are heated, are usually for lizards and snakes, and then you have the aquarium when you have water inside, and you have indeed paludarium if you want everything at once. So I was looking up VIFs because I don't understand why are people talking about vivariums. Are they really putting ants in natural setups nowadays? Well, no, it's a box. So I got confused about that. And when people started talking about incubators, because I wanted a VIF of my own, I couldn't find incubators either, because then you get things for chickens, spiders, and for snakes. So that doesn't work either. In the Netherlands...
Why is that? I haven't looked into incubators, but why can't you use them?
Because usually incubators are set up to hold eggs. So you have all these crates, stuff inside to put the eggs in, like holders and stuff, and they rotate the eggs, and they have airflow and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a little bit hardcore to put ants in that.
It's around the roller coaster for ants then. Then I was looking, because somebody came up with the solution to that. In the Netherlands, we call one, or at least the one that I'm using, a dry terrarium, which means it's not made of glass, but it's made of wood.
But that does describe a little bit more what we have, at least what I have. So what is your experience then? What do you have today?
Well, I bought one of those, the last expo in the Netherlands. There's a new expo coming right up. I think it's doing pretty well. It was a little bit because I had to adjust the whole shelf that I have my ants on, because the size, it's different size. I wanted to make like a custom one. But it was really hard to find a custom one, and I was like, I could order a custom one, or I could just buy one right off the bat right now. So I bought one, and we put it in, and then I had to struggle around with the heating, because I had no idea how to heat it up. Do I put the heat mat underneath? Do I put it on top? Do I whatever? So I put my heat mat, a giant one, on the back, and I was like, well, maybe now the back is heated, but the front might not be heated. So I put a 5 meter heat cable in it, which runs around on the inside.
And I'm sitting here laughing a little bit, because what sort of control do you have to control this heat?
I have no controllers. No control whatsoever. So the first day I made it into a sauna, and it was 32 degrees inside. Because nice and warm, and it's made of wood, and it smells like wood, and it is the whole sauna experience for the ants. So I had to close the in the summer. I always close like this frame in front of the window because of the heat that comes inside, and I had to close that earlier this year because it was on the VIF, and the VIF did not like it, or at least the ants inside did not like the extra heat. And only now have I, because it was on 28 to 32 degrees, and only now I've started adjusting the heat to be around 25, 26, 27, 28, because of the leaf cutters that are coming.
Oh.
So now I'm more testing around.
I hope for your sake and your aunt's sake that you'll get some sort of controller unit in. I mean, as we'll go on to later on, I mean, it can't control the cooling. Well, it can if you buy some very expensive stuff, but generally they're mostly... It's cheap to get something that controls the heat, not as much the cooling.
Cheap? Blah.
Well, it has a price.
If you got a VIF, cooling is easy peasy.
Yeah, that's something we'll come on to a little bit later. So, all right, so finally we have my experience here, and I saw a VIF for the first time at Ancon, the first Ancon in 2022. I'd seen it before, but Antics pretty much was the first VIF I saw. They keep all of their colonies, all the colonies for sale at least, inside VIFs. which then have a set temperature. And I remember thinking that was so cool, but also insanely impractical for private people because it was a huge rig and all of this. I'm like, nah, I'm just gonna heat my room and just throw out all my money and just get a big electric bill because that's way cooler. And then this guy, Jack, started showing his Viv, and well, I was like, nah, that's all right. I'm just dying with my electric bill over here. And then suddenly, even people like Wakushi also started using Vivs, and I'm like, oh my god. And then suddenly, I had to move. Well, I have to move soon, and I realized that now I'm no longer gonna have an ant room, meaning I'm gonna have my ants in my living room, and I'm not gonna warm my living room to 25 degrees. So here we are. I got my first Viv. It was a very expensive Exo Terrara thing. It was a glass box, and the glass is very bad at keeping heat inside. So feeling on the outside of the glass, it was hot, and the heat mat inside was just constantly turned on. And I then bought a massive big wooden box, which I'm now keeping all my colonies inside. So now I have a massive 120 centimeters long wooden box that is like 45 centimeters deep and 45 centimeters tall or something. And it's controlled with 2 massive heat mats on the back, and those are controlled by little thermostat. Now, this thermostat I actually originally bought from when I got my leaf cutters, because I wanted to heat my leaf cutters, and that was many years ago. And I pretty much just grabbed that thing out again, and it's still working fine. It was fairly expensive, if I remember correctly, but it's also like 3 years ago since I bought it, so I can't quite remember. So yeah, that's pretty much my history of keeping or my history of Vivs. And today I really like them. It's just so easy, especially when you go out and spend the money on getting a proper controller. No matter what time of day I look inside, it's always 26 degrees, day and night. Of course, as long as it's cold outside, this is not going to be an issue. Summertime is where we have issues, but we'll come on to that later. So yeah, that is a little bit of an introduction to our experience with Vivs. So I've written down here that we need to do 2 pros and 2 cons for each. So starting off with Lynn, what is the pros and cons in your experience with Vivs?
Well, so far I found a pro that it's very stable with heating. It doesn't fluctuate very much. It just stays one temperature mostly, unless you have the sun on it, of course. And there's less disturbances for the ants. Well, sometimes if you open the window, it can cause a little bit of a reaction. But my ants so far have learned that opening the window means that food is coming, so that's nice.
That's cool. What are your cons then?
Well, I find it hard to access because there's always windows in the front, and mine is only 80 centimeters long. Is it 80 centimeters? Yeah, it is 80 centimeters long. So the windows are always in the way when I want to get to one of the setups. The visibility is also limited. It doesn't come with built-in lights, of course. So it's pretty much a dark box at all times. And I have to use my phone's flashlight to look inside. And the maintenance gets harder because unlike you, I do not take out my setups out of the Viv. So I have to prep everything beforehand and then really quickly put everything inside and stuff like that because I don't want it to cool off very fast, which was a bit of a deal when my house was still only 18 degrees. I could not open it for very long because all of the heat would escape.
Yeah, it's all valid concerns. I think it's more something we'll come on to a little bit later again. But yeah, I can definitely relate to both your pros and your con list. Jake, do you have some pros and some cons about Vivs?
Well, same as Lynn, definitely stability of temperature, that's definitely a pro. And on the flip side of what Lynn said, I always like mine fully up, so they're quite. I like looking at them under the kind of lights in my vivarium, which I do like. It's like, what cons? To be fair, if you want to pipe things about, so say you wanted to have your leaf cutters going across the room, you do have to kind of drill a hole in the side, which is kind of a downside, I guess. It's kind of something you wouldn't have to do if you didn't have one.
It's definitely a big. It's also one of my cons.
That's about all I can think of at the minute. Yeah.
I'll say my pros. It's definitely like you say, stable heating, and stable heating is also cheap heating, because the thing is, it's very easy to use heat mats and heat cables, but they're very hard to get stable because, of course, if the room is hot, well, the heat cables get hotter, or they heat more because the overall temperature will be higher. And then it's harder to control heating on individual colonies, because then you kind of have to have one heating cable for one colony and one heating cable and on one controller, because everything will be different from colony to colony, and placement around your room. Are they in the sun? Are they in the shadow? Please don't put your ants in the sun generally, at least not the nest. But with having a Viv, as long as the Viv is not in the sun, you'll get one big stable temperature, like you say. And not only that, it's also cheaper because you only have to heat up one box, and because it's usually an insulated box or an insulating material, it's cheaper because you only need one big heat mat to control all the colonies. But my big con, like you also say, it's definitely, first of all, limited visibility, like you said, Lynn. It's definitely true. I have also installed light in my Viv now. It took me like a month before I really down prioritized it, and I'm so happy I finally got my lights in there because I love it. I'm so happy that I have lights in there because it's amazing to look at the colonies, and because the lights are close to the ants compared to normally, you get a very nice color and very bright light on the ants. I've simply just connected my lights to my ceiling light, so when I turn on the ant room's light, the light also turns inside the Viv, so it's always turned on when I'm in here and always turned off when I'm not in here. So it's very simple, because I knew if I had to put a switch on the Viv, I would forget to turn it on because I'm lazy, and I would also forget to turn it off. But the big con is definitely moving around the colonies. You suddenly are very limited to this box. Like my Nova Mesa Cockerelli, if I put them inside the Viv, half of the Viv is taken up by one colony, and that is without the outworld. You would then have to drill to get the outworld outside, and suddenly, with the bigger the colonies, the less... Well, I mean, it's not less, it doesn't get worse, because, again, you can just stack the setups, and you can do all kind of different things, but I feel like a Viv is brilliant for a lot of small colonies. And big colonies, well, they don't ruin it, but they should almost have separate Vivs because, well, they are big. So my pros would definitely be it's a lot cheaper. It's expensive when you set it up, but compared to heating an entire room, it's cheaper, and it's a lot more stable compared to heating individual colonies with heat cables. And my cons would be it's a lot harder to move around with the setups. You are very limited on space. You have to work with a square box, and like you said, Lynn, it's harder to do maintenance. I take all of my colonies out because I enjoy doing that, but once the colonies get bigger, I can't, because then you can't move around big colonies that easily. Yeah, that would be my pros and cons. So we have also had some comments from my YouTube channel, and let's just read out 3 comments that we have. And I'll start with reading. These are 3 cons. No, these are 3 pros. That's what they're called. From viewers just sharing their thoughts. I'm starting off with Robert 168. More efficient than heating the entire room, and no doubt a lot cheaper. And Robert, I 100% agree. It sounded like you kind of just stole my thought. So I'm gonna take my thought and say I said it first. So yeah, you should have made that comment a little bit earlier, Robert. All right, Lynn.
Ko Verhoeven 2904 says, this might be the way for me to keep ants that need more heat. Now I only got local queens because I never turn on the heater, and they can handle that. I think a lot of ants won't like 15 to 16 degrees Celsius in winter.
Yeah, and it's a well put it out comment right there, because Vivs are only really important for people keeping tropical ants. If you're just keeping native ants, well, Vivs are not really. Unless you live in America and keep leaf cutters and they need a stable temperature, most ants can kind of just fluctuate with the room temperature, at least if it's native ants. Yeah. All right, Jake, will you read out the final comment?
Yeah, this one's from Spirit Ants. I use the Vivarium for my ants and it works great. Keeps a stable temperature and prevents lots of vibrations. Having great success with my colonies in there. That sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of didn't think about the vibrations as well, but they do kind of stop a lot of the vibrations, especially because
Yeah.
they're quite heavy, the boxes, and even if you're walking around, it's not really rattling anything too bad.
No, that's very true. You get a little bit more of a stable compared to if you have an unstable table where your ants are and you walk past it, the table may shake. We also have Michael contacting me. Michael also said that it's a good vibration dampener because you can quite easily put stuff in under the colonies. And because you have a square box in there, you can quite easily put in a square box of foam, and suddenly all of your colonies are on a little bit of foam or insulation. That also helps dampen the vibration. So it's a lot easier to just put in, because you have a square in there, so it's easier to put in dampener than if you had a freestanding table. Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know if
now that might work with my the what are they called? The windows shoving around. I might actually use Michael's idea to implement on my own setup.
it's not. Yes, that's true actually, because the same can be said with my colony or with my setup. The colonies don't react when I drive past with my chair, but as soon as I start touching the glass, that's when you cause vibration, and of course it's part of the VIF. But if you just put a little bit of dampener in there, it
Might
may
be less.
yeah.
Decrease. I'm not gonna, because I think those giant mouse mats for the
Yes.
keyboard and stuff. I think that might be great as well to use as dampener.
Only thing, I mean, it's the correct material. I'm just curious to see if maybe you can get it cheaper. I don't know how expensive a giant mouth pad is, but I would guess the material it's made of, you can probably buy it like a little bit of a raw, maybe.
And it got to withstand the heating as well.
Yeah, it needs to be, of course, heat-resistant material. Although it's not going to be really hot. I mean, all material should hopefully be able to lay in the sun, where it should be like 50 degrees in summertime, in just pure sunlight. Either way, I think we shall move on to a little bit on the next part of the discussion here, which is how do we heat up the setup? Do we use a heat cable, a heat mat, or a heat lamp? These are three quite different versions. If you hook it up with a controller, all of these will work quite similar. Of course, heat cables are the long cables running around, and you can control a little bit more exactly where you want them to be. Heat mats are a little bit big and not really much. You can place them one area and they can heat up one zone. And a heat lamp is pretty much the same as a heat mat, except it's often a little bit more powerful. But again, if it's controlled, then it's not going to be more powerful long term. But I was originally going to say I think heat mats are the best, just because they're big, flat, and you can just stick them to the back of the wall compared to heat cables. Heat cables are a little bit more all over the place, and in my opinion, doesn't look as nice. And heat lamps are just very big and bulky. But Jake, you made one hell of a comment on YouTube, and can you just pretty much read that out to the viewers?
I'll just blabber on about the nerdy bits, but I think you're better off with heat wires, to be fair, because they kind of radiate their heat a little bit better. Like the heat mats, they give off a different kind of, like, it's all infrared, but like a longer wavelength, which basically, like, as soon as it kind of hits anything, it gets absorbed. So that's kind of like anything more than like a centimeter away from the heat mat is not really going to get like that much heat in. Whereas the wires, they seem to give off a slightly kind of shorter wavelength, which gets a little bit further away, so it can kind of heat from a little bit of a distance a bit better. That's what I've found anyway. And yeah, although definitely the wires don't look as tidy as heat mats, but yeah, but you can combo them as well and have a heat mat and a heat wire, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what you have done, Lynn. To be honest, Jake, I don't think you're wrong with what you're saying. I can't say for 100% certainty if you're right either, but I think if you have a well-insulated box, it's not really gonna matter over weeks or over many hours. But it's definitely true if you have a cold room and if your box is not well insulated, it may be better to go with heat cables, if what you're saying is true at least.
You can cheat as well. Like if you've got a heat mat and you want it to kind of actually heat a box, if you put like something big, like say you had a bit of slate, like, and put that on your heat mat, when the slate will absorb the infrared off the heat mat perfectly fine, and then it will re-emit it as different wavelengths as well. so it will end up warming up the rest of the room as a kind of as a secondary, if you get what I mean.
It's becoming very, very scientific. I can't say I get you 100%.
But like, yeah, if you give the heat mat something to warm up, whatever it warms up will also warm up your Vivarium.
Yeah.
Whereas,
I get it.
Yeah, so you'll kind of get good results if you give the heat mat something like big and solid to heat up as well. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you have direct contact, it's better for the heating to get transferred directly through materials, right?
And then the big lump can re-emit it to everything else.
Yeah.
Nice, yeah.
Again, if you have a well-insulated box, and in my case, a wooden box, or just wood in general is good enough for my insulation. But if you have a very cold, I remember Big Ross, he's saying that he's going to do a Viv as well, but in a very cold room, and he may have to either, I don't know how he's going to do it, but it may be harder for him to keep up the temperature if it's in a very cold room. I'm still going to be on team heat mat, because if you have a insulated box, it should be all right. But then again, in my past experience, I can say that in my experience, heat cables are more powerful, also because you can just turn them up and down and up and down, and it seems like when I touch 3 lines of heat cable, it's more hot than if I touch like the same space on a heat mat. But again, for longer times where there isn't a major fluctuation in the temperature, a heat mat will do just fine in my opinion. Lynn, what would you say is the better choice, cable, mat, or lamp?
Well, I actually also wanted to ask a question about your setup, because you only use 2 heat mats. But what is the temperature like closest to the window? Does it really radiate that much? Because they're quite pretty hefty heat mats compared to what I use. Do they really heat up all the way to the glass? Yours?
Well, the thing is, I've put my probe. I mean, it's we can go in a little bit into the probe location, because the probe is, I think, the most important thing of a Viv is almost the probe location. Because if you put it, I mean, of course, Lynn, you're currently going without a probe. And of course, a probe is what controls. So basically, you have your outlet, you plug in your controller has a new outlet, and you plug the heat cable into that new outlet. You then set a temperature on the controller, and the probe measures a temperature. So if it's below the set temperature, the probe will turn on the heat cable, and if it's above this temperature, the probe will turn off the heat cable. So therefore, the probe location is very important. I've decided to put mine high up towards the front, meaning towards the front, I'll always have like 26 degrees, because it's towards the front. Because I've put it at the top, I know the top temperature is 26. If you put it near the floor, you can't say for sure how hot it is in there, because hot air rises up, meaning if it's 25 at the bottom, it may be 27 at the top. May not be a huge difference, but again, if you have colonies that are sensitive, it may become an issue. And if you measure from the top, you know for certainty that it's not hotter than that. But then again, maybe you want it to be hotter. So it's important where you put the probe to get your locations, or to get your measurements correct. That's also why I've put a little bit of test measurements around to make sure it's stable all the way around. But because I know near the front is where it's 26, it may be 27, 28 near the back. I locate all my colonies towards the front, and I put their outwalls against the back. So all the outwalls are against the back, where it's potentially a little bit more hot, and towards the front, where I know it's 26, that's where the colonies are living. So to answer your question, Lynn, that's how I ensure that it's hot at the front, by measuring at the front and having the colonies at the front. I don't know how hot it is at the back. It may be a little bit hotter. But because I open the Viv for quite short times, and because the heat mats are quite big, they control that temperature in there very nicely. I can open the doors. I mean, it's also a room that's 22 degrees, 20 to 22 degrees regularly in my ant room. But when I open the doors, it doesn't really affect unless the doors are open for like 5 minutes plus. That's when I can start to see the heat mat turning on a lot more. But for the first few minutes, there's very minimal heat transfer, because the inside room temperature and the inside Viv temperature is quite close to each other. I don't know if that answers your question, Lynn.
A little bit, because that means that at the top, at the front, it's that temperature. But
Yes.
what about the location where the colonies are at in the front, close to the window?
Yes,
Did you put a sensor on there?
Exactly. Yeah, I have 3 sensors in total that are moving a little bit around, so I've placed them in different areas. And to be honest, it's around 1 degree difference towards the front compared to the back. But I just have the sensor towards the front, so I have the sensor in front of the outworld. That's where I have my control sensor, and it's pretty much agreeing exactly with the other sensor. And towards the back, it's 1 degree higher in my measurements. But yeah, that's why I have a control sensor.
All right, great. So yeah, that answers my question, because I'm. I currently, of course, I use the heat cable and the heat mat, because one is not powerful enough without the other. But I might be looking into investing to more powerful heat mats then, and then maybe also one of those heavy stat heat mat stats, whatever, temperature thermostat thingies, in case they are good enough. Because I do like the idea of saying, like, I want a 26, and then it having to do it solo, because it turns off as well, right? If it gets too hot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it. I don't know how well the mic is because I'm looking away. I'm looking at it right now. It's turned off right now because it's just hot enough in there. It's still just turned off. Sometimes when I go and look, it's like turned off, and then for a second it's on, and then it's off again, and then seconds it's on, and then it's off again. And when I touch the heat mat, it's very, very minimal, a little bit hotter than the inside. But right now it's just turned off because when my PC is inside the room, because the overall room temperature is like 24 now, because I'm sitting in here and recording and talking, it's actually just turned off completely at the moment. But yeah, I have the Happy Stat controller, and again, I think it's a little bit pricey. It's like, I can look it up, but I do believe it's quite expensive. I don't know do you know the price of it?
Well, the one that I found here is 109 euros, and then you have the cheaper version of this one, maybe. This is 80 euros. Oh, I'm gonna look into this one. But it looks like a cheaper, it's a black version. It looks cheaper than what you have. But at least it does have the heat, the power, and then the mains heater and the sensor thing. So I think those are most important. And of course, how hot you wanted to have. So about 80 euros.
It's also important to look at how much wattage it can handle.
Oh God.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, again, I think I found one. I found mine right here. It's 550 Danish kroner, which is around 55 pounds or something ish, divided by 10 ish. So yeah, around 55 pounds, and it's a 600 watt thermostat, meaning unless you have more than 600 watt, it shouldn't be a problem. I have 2 massive heat mats, and they combined use 120, so that is no issue whatsoever. However, at one point I thought, I wonder if this can control my oil radiator, and it popped the fuse the second I put my oil radiator in, because it's like a 3.5 amp fuse inside. But yeah, a 600 watt heating thermostat is what I have, and it's around 55 pounds ish. Jake, you said you had something for like 10 pounds or something. What are you using?
Yeah, well, I think I've actually got one of your fancy ones somewhere, but I just use the cheap little, they're like a white plug, and they just got a probe, and you just like stick the probe where you want it and kind of set it up at the plug. And I've had them for like, some of them for like over 4 or 5 years, and they just seem to keep going. And they're so cheap as well, where I'm just kind of sold now that like these are good enough kind of thing. And yeah, they're just reliable enough, and they get the job done, and you can kind of tune them quite well as well. So if you want it like really precise, you can tell it like keep it between like 0.1 degrees of this temperature, whereas personally I give it a little bit more sway, about 0.2 or 3, because otherwise it clicks all the time, because it's constantly like on off on off on off on off on off sort of thing.
Yeah,
I don't know if your one, I don't know if they do that. I haven't actually tried it, but
no,
yeah.
mine does it as well. But I think it just have one controller, and that is the set temperature for when it's too hot. But I think it has some sort of controlled, don't turn on and off 10 times a second, but more do it once every second.
Yeah.
I can't tell. I mean, all I can say is works. I think, to be honest, it doesn't really matter what product you use, as long as you do controlled readings as well. Because as long as you have got controlled reading, saying, okay, you look inside the Viv, and your controlled heating says it's 26. Oh, okay, then my controller must work. Because if something happens to the controller, the brain of the heating, and it starts not working, well, you can very well quickly be cooking your ants. So I think it's important to have a secondary sensor in there, so you can control the primary sensor, so you know that it's working as intended. I mean, I just look when I do my maintenance, I look at that controller sensor and it's like 26. Ah, well, things are working fine then, and then I continue. We have a comment from Antinous, I'm gonna say it like that, who's saying, be careful with heat mats. They can cause hotspots if you have any tanks too close. I would suggest long heat cables around the bottom and top of the edge instead. Also consider a small fan to circulate the heat. And it then also continues to recommend that the Happystat is a very reliable product. And it's certainly a better solution than heating the entire room. There's a few things we're gonna go into with this comment, but first of all, I think it's very well said that don't put your colonies right against the heat mat towards the back. If you are putting I have a central heat mat towards the back, and I've deliberately put the outwalls towards the back, because again, if you have a direct contact from heat mat to product, you can get a lot hotter, and again, depending on where your probe is, it may be hotter towards the back than the front. So yeah, I would just recommend never have a direct contact and put the colonies where you have the probe, because that way you make sure that the probe and the colonies are in the set temperature you would like. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on this. Would you say it's better to go with heat cables here than a heat mat?
I guess it depends where you're heating them from as well. Like mine heating is all on the walls, so I like my heat wires up there. But if I was heating from below, heat mats would obviously be a lot easier.
I use a heat mat on like every single setup that I own, except for like the really tiny Venuses and everything, which are test tubes. So a cable runs underneath. But generally, they don't really have hotspots or anything unless the heat mat's broken.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue. I've had direct contact for many years as well, with heat mats. I think it's better. Just you may as well be careful if you have a Viv. But again, I would also. I mean, it's technically worse to put the heat mats on the walls than on the floor, because heat goes up, so you actually don't heat the floor if you put the heat mats on the wall. But again, when you close the glass, you have a Vivarium, which with very minimal airflow, meaning meaning slowly the entire box will get heated either way. I think it's firstly a problem when you open up the door, then you have a lot of loss, and that's where I would recommend you heating from the bottom. If you have colonies outside of Viv, heat from the bottom, because if you put a heating mat on the wall and your colonies next to them, it's not gonna work. You need a direct contact because, well, it's an open area. But if you have them inside a Vivarium, inside a Viv, it's a closed environment, and you have minimal heat waste, heat loss, meaning that, well, the heat will slowly but surely get the entire Viv up to temperature. He then goes on to say, consider a small fan to circulate the heat. Now, I have some thoughts about this, but Jake, do you have a fan in your incubator Vivariums?
No, but if you had it sealed enough, you could. But if your Vivarium's a little bit drafty, you're gonna kind of blow away the heat, but you're also gonna like destroy any sort of humidity. So if you're keeping like desert ants, it would be perfect. But for anything but desert ants, like the humidity in your Vivarium is going to be very low if you've got it like warm and blowing all the time. Because I think it's just the way the Vivariums are. Like if you've got a room and all the air is 22 Celsius, and even if it's like 100% humidity, as soon as it goes into the Viv, it becomes like, I don't know, 20 6 degrees, but 80% humidity because it's warmer, and then it sucks all the heat out and then like legs it again, if you get what I mean. You end up pumping the humidity out basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if it's sealed enough, you could do it. But at the moment in mine, I've had to actually put plants and things like that inside of my vivarium just to kind of boost the humidity a bit, because it's a little bit drafty kind of thing.
So why aren't you? Wouldn't you say the setups inside just control their own humidity, or is it because you have leaf cutters in there, or why do you want a high humidity inside?
Well, you just kind of don't want it too low, to be fair. Kind of, I'm aiming for about 75-ish, because that's quite a nice place. So if I want, I can like make a kind of a tank a little bit more humid by spraying it a bit like inside. But I think 75 is quite nice. If it's too low, you end up kind of drying out everything too fast. So like even your test tubes in your setups, like you'll watch them, they'll just go down at that like quite a bit faster, to be fair. And you end up just sucking all of the moisture out, and like drinkers like go down a bit faster. And especially kind of setups that you've got to hydrate, like they end up just drying out like a day or two faster as well. So it just adds up to more work. So if you can keep the humidity up a bit, you're kind of saving yourself a little bit of work in the long run.
I can see where you're going with that. I'm unsure how big. I mean, it all depends on how much you do maintenance. I feed. I mean, the thing is, with my setups, of course, I don't have any dirt setups or anything inside. I just have, well, at the moment, Wakushi setups only. And because I just water the gypsum, each nest is, of course, quite sealed, and only the outwall is ventilated. And because the lid of the outwall is closed 99% of the time, I think it can be very humid inside each setup without it being dry outside. But of course, when you have dirt setups and stuff like that in there, I see why you would like a high humidity. But Lynn, would you ever consider installing a fan in your setups or in your Viv?
No, never. My Viv, wait, which cable is it? One of the cables at least. I think the heat mat cable runs via the front, because because mine is a dry terrarium. I do have 2 holes in the ceiling to fit heat lamps if I wished, or lamps in general. My heat mat cannot go through those holes because it's too tiny, and I didn't want to drill an extra hole. So my cable runs via the window. It means there's a hole in there. If I would install like a fan or something in there, I think it would just push all of the heat out.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, with my setup, I've bought something with pre-made holes in the side, so you can disconnect small plugs and then you have a hole. I just don't see the point of a fan, to be quite honest. I mean, even back when I heated my entire ant room, I had a 2-degree gradient from the hottest spot to the coldest spot, and I have like a good 5 solid meters across the room. But as I didn't go much in and out of the room, the entire room was just hot. And with such a small, I mean, it's a small containment box. I mean, I don't know, it's like 200 liters or something inside of there, maybe more, but no, it's like a 300 liter space perhaps if you have 120 by 45 by 45. I just don't see a purpose for a fan, because again, unless you have it open 95% of the time, everything in there should just be exactly the same temperature, as long as it's not 1 degree outside. So in my opinion, I just don't think a fan is needed, because I can't say, like you guys also say, it will cause more humidity to either it's gonna dry everything out a little bit more, and if you have ventilation, it's gonna just push more air out of the ventilation or the different holes. And yeah, to be honest, I just can't see the point, to be honest. Now,
it might come from like those really expensive incubators. They are built more like fridges. So not only do they have like a sealed front, they also have air circulation in the back. But that's not the case with these things, because we, or at least you and me, we're practically using terrariums instead of incubators.
Yeah, and I think again, it also depends a lot on what you put inside. I mean, I put a finished ant setup with its own hydration source and own environment and put that inside a box that's just heated. I think an incubator is a lot more so the incubator can do exactly what the specific thing you put inside of it can do. So if you have an exotic snake egg that you need to have specific requirements for, you put that in the incubator and the incubator takes care of it. But the setups the ants live inside already do that. So the only thing my Viv does is basically just heat up the setup. The setup takes care of the humidity and the space and all of the living conditions for the ants. And the only thing the Viv does is simply just heat it up. And I think, yeah, an incubator is like the home for whatever you put inside of it as well. I imagine at least. I don't know. To be honest, I don't quite know what an incubator is. But from just talking with you, what I imagine it is a setup that also have to control the humidity almost. Well, depending on what you put in. I don't know. I'm just gonna stop talking here, because we have a question from Sheeran Ants saying a heat gradient, and yeah, I mean you can create a heat gradient inside of Viv by simply using a small heat mat, putting it on one side, measuring in the middle, and you will have a hot side where the heat mat is. You will have a stable temperature in the middle, and you will have a colder side to the other end. If it's a long setup, at least. My setup is 120. So if I put my probe at the 60 centimeter mark and my heat mat at the 0 mark, I'm sure that it's going to be a little bit colder towards the 120 mark.
Well, I think you're going to get one inevitably anyway, because you got like 5 sides or however many it is of wood, and then your one glass side, and it's always going to leak out a bit of heat as well, your glass side. So it's like there's always going to be a little bit of a gradient inside of the setup, unless you had like a fully sealed wooden box. But yeah, I think like it's quite useful to have as well, because I know mine, I've kind of got 3 levels, but I've only got 2 of them kind of warmed up at the minute, and one of them's like 24, one's 25, and I know the different spots like all around the kind of incubator for different temperatures. So if it's like, oh, you need to be a little bit cooler, they'll put them in the right spot, if you get what I mean. Because they're never like, it's never going to be 100% uniform kind of thing, the like temperature.
No, and I think again it's just important to read your ants. I remember I tried putting my bull ant setup. I turned her around, and I could see that she was suddenly quite a far away from the heat mat, and suddenly, like the way she is now, the outworld is touching the heat mat, and then she's living right at the door of her setup, meaning she's actually the closest towards the heat. If I turned it around, meaning she would be close to the heat, she actually moved out of the nest and out towards the outworld. So that showed me that, okay, it's too hot now, and if I turn it around, that gradient of, 10 centimeters actually allowed her to decide where in the nest she would stay. This is, of course, only because this temperature inside is so stable, which is another major plus. She can place herself right at the sweet spot of the heat and the humidity and live there. So again, I think it's a lot about reading your ants, seeing how they react, and from there decide what you want to do.
Well, mine actually has a gradient because the back is hotter than the front. That's why the heat cable is running around to keep the temperature a little bit up in the front. But I'm currently experimenting which temperature is perfect for the leaf cutters, because I do not want my leaf cutters in the 32 zone, but I do want my red runner eggs, which are also in there, which is a cockroach, to be a little bit on the warmer side. So on the back where my Myrmecia is, Peggy, she's on the far back side is like 28, maybe 30 degrees, and her front side, so where the nest is at close to the window, should be around 25 degrees. And now I've created a zone to the left of my Viv, which is also 25 degrees, which would be perfect for the leaf cutter. So you can create gradients in there by just placing your heat products in a certain way.
I'm impressed you have such big gradients. Yeah, impressive.
I have a really, really cheap vivarium.
Again, I think the less powerful heat cables or heat mats you get, the more gradients you'll also get, because the hotter will be towards the back and the cooler towards the front. I went for the big stable temperature by just putting 2 massive heat mats in there, because then I know when they're turned on, everything heats up very quickly. When they're turned off, it stays like that. And look at it now, it's just turned off now. I wonder how little they're actually turned on during the day. It's still turned off right now, and that's because it's just stable in there. So again, I went for the stable move and just bought 2 massive things, because then I know it was very easy for them to handle. If they had to work overtime and be turned off a lot more, it'll be a lot hotter towards where they're located and colder towards the front. So that it's definitely possible to create a gradient if that's something you wanna go out and try. There's another problem. What if the VIFs gets too hot? How can we cool the VIF? Now, Jake, I know your brain is a little bit of a crazy brain. You have a crazy brain, Jake, and I'm already prepared to hear something crazy from you. So, Jake, how are you gonna cool your VIF?
Oh my god, it's like literally so easy. And you'd think like, oh, saving money and keeping things hot, that's the best thing about a Viv. No, you can do the opposite as well. And because you've basically got like a semi-insulated sealed box, if you get like 2-litre bottles of like just kind of lemonade bottles or any sort of bottle basically, and just stick it in the freezer and let it get cold, and well, if it's roasting, like say it's like 35 in your room and you need to keep your leaf cutters at 25, just stick like a couple kind of big 2-litre bottles into your vivarium, and it will at least stop the temperature going up, and usually you can knock a few degrees off as well, and it makes it a lot easier to manage as long as you've got the bottles kind of lined up. But if there's going to be a heat wave, what I do is like get a bottle or 2 frozen ready to go.
That's actually insanely smart, because worst case, if it gets too cold, the heat mat's just gonna turn on.
Yeah, and heat it all back up.
Yeah, you just need to make sure that you put again, don't put the ice near the probe, because then the probe will definitely think it's too cold. But instead put the ice as far away. That was actually a lot simpler than what I was suggesting. Lynn, how would you cool your Viv?
Well, in the summer I'm gonna turn off all the heat, because my house gets really, really, really hot in the summers because of the sun standing directly on the room. So I'm just gonna turn off all the heating and take out the windows. But that's just because the house is the correct temperature. Right now I'm controlling the heat and turning down the heat by just turning down the heat mat, because it has one of those what do you call it? Little switch thingies that you can turn on, turn high, turn low. That's what the heat mat has. So I've just turned it more low, I guess.
Right.
And if it's too hot, like right now, and I have to do something in emergency, I will just take out my hands. Easy fix.
Very true. I was gonna go for this. See, this is my primitive crazy brain. Because back when I had to heat my entire room, I bought this because I put my radiator in this what is it called, the habitat thing, and because that's made for 600 watt, and it immediately blew the fuse when I put a nearly 2000 watt radiator in. I went online to see what I could find, and Antics Rich, he recommended a certain product. I can't remember what it's called, but it's an industrial heater and cooler controller for like big warehouses, or for like a setup for like plant areas where you have plants, exotic plants and all of that. And that thing is very simple. It is the exact same thing like everything else. It has a probe, measures, but it can either turn on a heating cable or turn on a cooling cable. So that's a little bit of what I thought I would kind of think about invest in. Now I did have this, but my leaf cutters actually, because I put the probe inside the leaf cutters, when I turned the temperature of my room down, and the leaf cutters destroyed the probe, destroying pretty much the little thing, making it worthless. It was only like, it was actually cheaper than the Habitat thing, so it's probably also a lot less precise, because it was only 200 and something Danish kroner, I think, so that was like 30 pounds. But that had a cooling plug, so you could buy a cooler.
The cheap ones I use, I think they can do that as well. You can kind of set them to either be heating things up or cooling things down. So Yeah, when they're cooling, yeah, it'll flip it. So it's like, oh, it's got to 32 Celsius. Turn it on, like cool it down.
Yeah, and pretty much, at least with the one I had, it just had 2 plugs. It had a heating plug and a cooling plug. And then you just turn on a cooling element in. And then you can buy like a mini air conditioner or something and put inside the Viv. But to be honest, I think I would much rather just go with some frozen bottles. Because I think they'll do the job. If you see that it gets very hot, and you see that your room temperature is 25 plus, I would pretty much just think about going out and grabbing some of these. I would then place the cooling elements. I would first of all pull the colonies as far away from this cooling element as possible, because they're really gonna mess everything up. And I'm just gonna place them as far away from each other. And again, the colonies are located where the probes are located. And then if it gets too cold, well, the probe's just gonna turn on. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna go with the bottles, like you say, Jake. I think that's actually a very simple idea that can work if it's necessary.
Yeah, I did once upon a time. I did experiment with an actual fridge as well. So I had the fridge on a thermostat. So if the room ever got or the inside ever got too hot, the fridge would actually turn on and actually cool it down a little bit. But yeah, it wasn't big enough in the end. But and it was
the
a bit
entire
dangerous.
room.
Oh no, just the ants, but it was like, because the ants were actually in the fridge kind of thing, but the fridge had heating stuff in it because, well, fridges are like basically just a really well insulated box, and you can keep things cold in there, but you can also keep things like warm inside too. But if I thought, oh yeah, this will be the best idea ever. If it ever gets too hot, like the fridge will just turn on and like cool it back down.
Oh, Jake, man. See, this is the kind of thing I expected you to say before. You always have these crazy ideas. Yeah. I think the safe way is to buy a thermostat that can both heat and cool. And then you can buy a mini air conditioner, like the size of your hand. I can just I know you can probably buy these things to just cool your face in the summer and just put one of those things inside of it. But again, it can work, but you don't know how precise the sensor is. But again, then if you just get controller probes, you'll know how. Oh, your controller sensors, you'll know how easy it works or not. Yeah, we are moving towards some of the final questions of today. Well, it is almost the final question. So, Jake, you've tried a few different materials, but what would you say is the best material for those out there who wants to do a DIY Viv?
Well, I think the outside material, don't worry too much, but bubble wrap is like your best friend, because it's really, it is quite insulating, and a few layers of bubble wrap, and even better if you can get hold of the tin foil coated thermal bubble wrap, you can basically make any box quite nicely insulated and an efficient little incubator. Yeah.
Sounds very fancy. What about you, Lynn? What would you say is a good material if you do DIY?
Well, wood, of course. Personally, I don't know much about DIY, so I don't really know. But you can also use the foamy stuff. You have these giant foam boxes that some people use to transport snakes in, which are also really good at holding heat.
I like styrofoam.
I think so. Yeah, that might be it. Styrofoam box, and just put a glass plate in front. Done. You can make an easy hole in it. Put a heat cable through. Perfect.
That styrofoam is also what earlier when Michael said that you could use something to make less vibration. Yeah, he sent a picture of styrofoam as a dampener, which is a well thought out thing. I mean, you could just go out and buy proper insulation. I think, again, the only thing I've tried is I had a glass box, and glass apparently transfer heats very well because I could just feel the outside of the glass was just warm. So that in there just heated up the setup, plus had a massive energy waste because it also heated up my room slightly. I mean, I think try with wood, and if wood doesn't cut it, wood is very cheap and it's easy to work around with, and you can make a box very simple. The hardest thing about a DIY Viv is pretty much making a door that you can both look through and open easily. But I looked into doing a DIY before. I was like, no, I'm just gonna buy one so I can recommend one that works. But I believe I found a pre-made glass door front that you can buy, So you can buy the door front, and you just have to put it on wood. And that way you can get the same door front as I have, which is just sliding glass, and you can put it on a DIY box behind it. But I mean, it all comes down to the prices. My box was very expensive, but it's also very big, and it's very efficient and works simple. Because it's 45 centimeters tall, I'll be able to add an additional floor in the setup, and that's something you see quite often with people keeping VIVs. If they have tiny founding colonies, they just put 2 floors in there. Suddenly they have a lot more space. Very simple, more space, just acquired from just adding a little second floor. Yeah, I mean, again, like I feel you two covered it quite nicely. Material, just get something that what construction workers use in real life, or something like styrofoam. Regarding my next question, is insulation needed? I think it comes down to the individual person, the temperature of the room, the size of your heating mat, cable, or lamp, if it's necessary or not. Finally, Ants Michigan pointed out that a VIV is not a new thing. He made this comment: how many generation worth of ant keepers are you behind? This is not a new concept. People have been doing this commonly for 6+ years in the ant keeping, or in ant keeping. This is just a small greenhouse, bro. Nothing to go crazy about. First of all, Ants Michigan will very passively aggressive comment right there. But I do want to say the reason I'm so hyped about VIVs is not that it's a crazy thing. Like I said, I've seen Ant Antics do this 2 years ago, and clearly, apparently, it's been done for 6 years in America, and I'm just many generations behind. I just thought that this was a unnecessary idea. This was not not something that was needed in ant keeping.
It was like unnecessary before, not long ago, really. Yeah.
Exactly, because it all depends on which ants you put inside. If I could easily keep Camponotus nicoporensis with just a heat cable inside room temperature, no problems. I couldn't do that with leafcutters because it would be so humid with the heating, with direct heating, that you would just not be able to see inside because it would just be crazy misting. And with me now keeping bullet ants, bull ants, Harbignathus venatus and trapjaw ants and all of these stigmatoma species, that's all requires heat. I just thought it would be easier just to get one big heated box instead of having to heat all of these and hope that they're all at stable temperatures. So, of course, this is not a new idea, but I do think it's something that the regular ant keeper who's just starting to keep exotics should think about, because it is a lot more easy to work around with. And
they as well, since like the Ukraine war, and when the energy prices shot through the roof, it kind of went from, oh, I'll heat the whole room to, oh, actually, I better just heat a small little box. And I think since then, vivariums have exploded. But before then, there wasn't really much need because it was kind of just heat the whole room. It's cheap.
Yeah, I agree. It's really, again, it's the same with all of the gas prices we've had through all of the years. Like, if gas suddenly goes very expensive, well, we stop driving unnecessary trips. It's like us humans, we adapt to our environment. And it's funny because I also mentioned this, and I did a big video on my extra channel where I was like, oh my god, I love this. Oh my god, give me questions for this podcast. And I remembered, I think it was on the Wakushi Friday chat many years ago, that Ant Ramblings went out and said, oh, it's in the spider hobby. We're all having these vivariums where we're keeping temperatures nice and controlled. And I'm like, who needs that? I mean, heat the room. And my mindset have just completely changed. And I mean, the main reason I got into this was because I'm moving soon and I don't want to heat my room anymore. And look at this, now I'm doing a podcast saying everyone should pretty much do it. But yeah, we have hit the final podcast. And Jake, what would your final thoughts be to the viewers about VIVs if they were in doubt whether they should do it or not do it?
If you're thinking about getting exotic species, I definitely think when you get them, it's worth just adding in a vivarium as something one of the costs of keeping them. So it's an amazing investment, to be fair, because once you've got one too, you'll be able to keep so many ants alive that previously would have been really difficult ants to keep alive for like anybody basically. But the vivarium just makes it easy. Well, not easy, but a lot, kind of boosts your success rate through the roof.
I mean, it does make it easy because it removes an entire problem. Everything around heating is now a problem that is not an issue, as long as you follow the correct guidelines of what temperature you should be at.
Oh yeah.
And it's insanely well set. It's a big investment if you have one exotic colony. It's a tiny investment if you have 10 exotic colonies. If you have, I mean, you don't need to buy a big box from the get-go, but you need to buy the same thermometer or the same controller, and you can buy heat cable. But that controller can be used for bigger setups. But it can only be used for one setup. That's important, because if I were to get another Viv one day, I would simply put it on top. I'm thinking that once I get leaf cutters later this year, I'll get another Viv, put it on top, and set that Viv to 24. So I have a 26 Viv and a 24 Viv. I would put the 24 below, because then the 26 Viv would be heated a bit better, and that would be the hotter watt generally, because heat goes up. And I would get two controllers, because again, we don't want one controller to heating both of them, because the top Viv would always be more hot, because the bottom Viv temperature will come up through the floor and heat the top one as well. That's why it's also a lot hotter if you live on the 10th floor than on the first floor. But yeah, Lynn, what are your final thoughts? And what would you say to people who are in doubt whether they should get a Viv or not?
Well, think a lot about the ants that you keep. Are you planning on specific species that don't grow very big very fast? Go for it. But large colonies generally, yeah, okay, it's fun, but if you have just one colony, you can fit it in. But if you have like 7 big colonies like me, you're not gonna be able to put all of those colonies inside of the Viv, sadly enough. And it's great for founding, like especially for species that are a little bit
Sensitive.
hard. Yeah, sensitive, hard to found, want perfect temperature, stuff like that. Then the vivariums are great to start up with. Like for, of course, the myrmecias and the harpagnathos, diachemas, trapjaws, the other ones. I'm not going to try and pronounce that. Leaf cutters. I don't really need it for stuff like iridomyrmex, because they are going to grow insanely regardless of the temperature that I'm going to keep them at.
Yeah, and again, once your colony is out of the founding stage, once you have a proper setup, if you just put a heat mat on half the setup, you'll see the colony adapt. And from there, you will know what the colony likes. So if you have a big setup, heat half the setup. If all of the colonies is at the heat, then you know, oh, they like the heat. Maybe I should heat even more. Yeah, again, the bigger the colony, the less attention you need to focus on the smaller things. But if you have one queen bullet ant or bull ant or harpagnathos, it's important to get the right environment.
Like also for ants Michigan, over here in the Netherlands, we don't use Vivs or terrariums of stuff like that to heat our ants. We always heat the room. And the only first time that I've ever heard about somebody heating their ants in a specific setup was ant store who bought a broken fridge and put heat mats inside of that to heat his foundation his foundation colonies for easier sell. To sell easier. Jesus, my brain is broken, it's late.
Clearly we're just behind over here in Europe. The Americans are superior. So yeah, we're just gonna have to take that as us Europeans. They've been doing it for 6 years and we're just starting to do it now.
I'm actually wondering how common broken fridges are, because if you have a broken wine cooler, which already has a glass front, you can very easily create a Viv with that.
Exactly. You could just go search online, actually. Go to like a cheap marketplace. Broken.
If you can find a deep one. So
Yeah.
I remember I looked up loads of them, and a lot of them, they're like really shallow. So you can make it like, so all your wine goes at the front, but you can only get like one hand in, if you get what I mean, deep. But if you can get a deep one, oh my god, they'd be the best things ever.
I mean, they don't need to be deep if you have big setups, but if you have founding colonies, it doesn't need to be that deep, I guess. I mean, most of my ant setups are around a wine bottle thick or long.
They normally have lights in as well. Well, some of them, too, so you can end up with like the whole shebang of lights and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth considering just checking out Marketplace or your local reseller to see if there are some broken fridges out there. Get a broken wine fridge and just put heat mats in there, and boom, just got a cheap Viv.
Just
all right,
giant one.
Oh
no, I've brought myself plants.
Oh no. Oh no. Oh, all right. Well, with that, I want to say I think this has been an awesome episode. I feel like we've really covered everything in quite thorough details and explained pretty much everything. If there's any more questions, feel free to ask them in the comments or send them to the Antpod Instagram, and we'll be sure to come out and respond. But yeah, I want to say thank you for listening in. The Antpod releases new episodes every Wednesday, and if there's a topic you would like to hear about, send a message to the Antpod Instagram. And with that, you'll hear more from us at the Antpod next week.